Hello, this is Angela Anderson. Thanks for joining me today. In this video, I'll be showing you how to paint 5 different whimsical feathers using acrylic paints. This was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy it. It's probably a medium level beginner project. It's perfect for practicing your fine lines and details. Down in the description of this video, you'll find all of the materials used in this project listed, and also there's a link to the video that shows how to draw and trace on the feathers onto your canvas. I'm using golden fluid acrylics, but you can use heavy body acrylics and thin them down with medium or your craft acrylics if you have any. Using a 3/8 inch angle brush, and I'm just going to fill in the top portion of this feather with black. This is carbon black. You can use whatever black you have. And this project can be adapted to whatever color scheme you want as well. I'm just going to show you what I did on mine, but by all means use it to just kind of as an inspiration to do your own thing with it. I always like to see when my students come back with a project that they've kind of taken and run with it and made it their own. So this is one that would be really fun for that because there's all kinds of different color combinations you could do with it. Once I get the main outline filled in, kind of use my brush to make some light brush strokes coming towards the center. So I'm using that center line and doing angled brush strokes in towards it. Now I am picking up some phthalo blue and going back over. I haven't cleaned out the black. There's not much left in my brush, but there is a little bit. So it's kind of graying out the phthalo blue there where the transition area is. Just picking up little bits at a time, using that edge of my angle brush to kind of draw in my feather on the one side, and then I'll fill it in on the other side the same way. And as I get toward the bottom here, I'm going to be a little bit less careful with how I am doing the ends of the brush. So I'm letting it be a little bit fuzzy there. I'm just kind of lifting up, flicking out a little bit as I lift to get that kind of rough edge on my brush. Instead of using the corner edge of my brush like I was up in the black to get a really fine straight line, I'm letting my brush sort of fan out off the edge of the feathers, and that'll kind of give them a little bit of a fuzzy look, like the bottom is frayed a little bit. As I get down toward the bottom, I have less and less black in my brush, so the color will get a little bit more vibrant towards the bottom of the feather. And here I'm just setting my brush down and sort of flicking it out from the center and lifting it up. I'm not pulling it, just sort of flicking it from the center and letting the tip of it make those kind of fuzzy edges. Then I went back in and used the very tip of the angle brush and turned it on its edge there and just used it to kind of draw in some very fine lines. You can make some nice fine lines with the angle brush if you push it flat so that the bristles are all stuck together. I'm using a water-soluble pencil just to make some V shapes in this other feather here. And I mixed up some gray, still using that 3/8 inch angle brush, just white and black. And I'm going to fill in every other section with the gray. If you make a mistake and go outside your lines, like right there, you could just take a soft, wet towel or a wet brush and rub it off while it's wet. You have to do this immediately or it won't come off. But acrylics are nice. As long as your undercoat is completely dry, you can wipe right off any mistakes that you make. And here I did it again. I'd like to say that it was on purpose, but it really wasn't. I was just not paying attention. I forgot to mention that I did base coat my canvas. This is a 16 by 12 inch canvas, and it's a canvas panel, and I have base coated it with white. So just plain old titanium white, give it a nice, I gave it 2 coats just to make sure it covered well. And then I transferred my design on. And like I said, there's a video for that transfer portion that you can watch, and where I draw out all these feathers. 5 different shapes of feathers. They're a lot of fun. Feathers seem to be really popular right now, so I've been really wanting to do a feather painting for quite a while now, and I'm excited to finally get to do it for you. They're very abstract, kind of not abstract, but very fanciful. I don't think you'll find these feathers anywhere on any birds, but we're just going to have fun with it and make up our own color schemes. So I'm kind of doing a blue, green, a little bit of yellow and gray, blacks with it, and just a pop of pink. This is a color called teal, and it is a high flow acrylic. It was actually probably too inky for this. I didn't really like how it was behaving on the canvas, and it was very hard to control on my palette. I did a practice with it, and it took over and like bled all over my other colors. So that's why I have them all contained in these little egg cups here. Oh, don't throw out your egg cartons. They work great for something like this. So the teal color, if you don't have it, it is white plus phthalo green plus phthalo blue. Almost equal parts phthalo green and phthalo blue, and then white, just to make it whatever kind of shade of brightness that you want. I've added a little bit of phthalo green to it there, and I'm just kind of changing the tone of the color as I get toward the top, and I'm kind of blending it back down into my previous area there. This angle brush, I didn't mention this on the gray feather over there, but you can use the tip of it to sort of draw in your feather lines. In this case, I'm using the side of it to do that so that you can see it's sort of streaking. I'm using the same angle all the way up so that it looks like the feather, each individual little piece of the feather is all going in the same direction. That makes sense. When you get to the top, kind of go straight up and then slowly kind of turn it so that it's back in the opposite angle, and you're making that V shape on the other side. And just fill it all in using the width of your brush there to kind of create your shapes. It's really fun. I enjoyed this process. And you could really leave it as is right here and just put your center line and be done with it. It's already got a little bit of a lining in it, but I went and took it a little bit further, and you'll see here I took the liner brush and used it to add even more details and layers. But I really did like it at this point just fine. Now I'm using this teal again on this other smaller feather and just filling it in all the way to the top on the one side. And there again, just using that angle, starting at the bottom and working my way up and continuing that angle. Now I've grabbed some Hansa yellow. This is a very vivid yellow, and it turned my teal color like a lime green. It was very pretty. So I really liked how it looked over the top of that teal color. And then I did the same thing, used it on the other side, blended it out a little bit, and used the edge of it to kind of draw some lines in my wet paint. So I went down a little bit farther and then just cleaned out my brush and grabbed the teal and worked it back up in. And here I've sped it up, and I've switched to a 1/4 inch angle brush because I found that that larger brush was just a little bit hard to control in this smaller feather. So just use whatever brushes that you happen to have. You could use a flat brush for this. You could even use a round brush. As long as you keep this same angle going, you'll be fine. Now I've mixed up some phthalo blue and white. I'm going to fill in the in-between on this gray and blue feather. Use the angle brush again. And after I get my paint on, before it dries, and before I move on to the next section, you'll see I'll use that edge of my brush to draw in some lines through the wet paint. Right there. Just using that edge of my brush to kind of draw in some lines. It's hard to see on this video, but really kind of every little bit helps. Using that edge of your brush, pulling it through the wet paint creates very faint lines in your wet paint. It's just one added layer of interest. Fill it all the way in, all the way up. Now I'm picking up straight phthalo blue with my larger angle brush, and I'm going to fill in this one side of my feather with this color. I've laid down a little bit of paint, and then I'm just kind of pulling it from the edge in. And I'm not worried too much about being super clean, kind of letting my brush edge make some ridges in the edge of the feather. I really liked how it looked, a little bit imperfect. And then just fill in all the way to the bottom there. And as I get toward the top here, I have a little bit less color in my brush, so the color is a little bit softer. I decided to do the other side of the feather with a little bit of that blue that I had mixed for the lighter blue. It's sort of a medium blue. It's not quite as light as the light blue gray feather. It's a little bit darker, but it's not quite as dark as the straight phthalo blue. It's got a little tiny bit of white in it. Just fill it all the way in, all the way up to the top with this lighter blue. Now I've mixed up my yellow oxide and Hansa yellow. And it's a very transparent color. Yellow oxide is transparent and the Hansa yellow is very transparent. So if you wanted it to be less transparent, you could use a cadmium yellow medium. Instead, I noticed that the lines from my tracing showed through. So I might, if I did this again, I probably would have erased those lines since this didn't really cover it very well. You could always add a little bit of white to your paint to make it more opaque, and I did that here at the end. I ended up adding a little bit of white. Using the same color and my number 4 round, just brushing in very light, almost dry brushes of that color on that last feather there, just to give it a little extra color. Now I'm picking up some white, adding it to that color, and just going back over to soften it up, add a little highlight. Now on the other side, I'm using phthalo blue, watered down a little bit. So it's not full strength phthalo blue. And I'm doing a few lines on the other side. If you can't get your lines very thin with your number 4 round, you could switch to a smaller round brush. I used it for this initial because we were kind of laying in our background color still, but once I start doing some of my finer details, I switch to a smaller round brush. And it's just up to you, whatever brush you're comfortable with. Now I've used the phthalo green and some white, and I've mixed those together to make this kind of soft green color. And really, I'm just kind of filling in any spaces that I feel like needed a second coat of paint. Getting a little bit more of the phthalo green and adding a few little brush strokes over the top on that one side. Now I've switched to a liner brush, and I've got that soft phthalo blue white mixture, and I'm using it just on the one side to add some very fine lines. I'm not going all the way to the end of the feather or to the edge. I'm just kind of going from the center line out about 3/4 of the way. You can pick whichever side you want to do your dark side of this feather. You could do both sides the same. It's really up to you. I did one side kind of like it was lighter than the other. So this is black plus our gray color. It's a little bit lighter than straight black. Just a tiny bit of white in it. A little bit darker than our base color. And I'm doing the same. I'm using this liner brush to do some very fine lines, and I'm just kind of starting at the tip and at the middle point and holding it very close to the end and just running my lines very quickly, keeping my angle the same all the way up. It's already starting to look like a feather. Okay, I'm going to use this same gray color and use it in this black section of this feather from that center line out on the one side. If you can't remember where that center line is, you can trace it back on, or you can draw it in with a white pencil. I'm using a little bit of that gray in my green feather on the end there. I'm using phthalo blue with my liner brush, and I'm just drawing in some little details. These will be some blue stripes. You can leave this part out if you want to leave your feathers looking a little bit more realistic. I just wanted to kind of add a little bit of a whimsical element, make it a little bit sort of tribal inspired almost, with these kind of stripes and dots in the feather. And when you're using your liner brush, you want to wet down your paints a little bit. These are already fairly fluid, so I didn't have to wet them down very much, but your liner works best when you have a very thin paint in it. I'm just putting on, it didn't want to go dark enough for me, so I just kept adding more and more layers until it got dark enough. Let it dry a little bit and do one more coat over the top so it's nice and bright. Okay, now I've added some white to my teal color, and I'm making some whitish colored stripes down toward the bottom there. And I ended up adding a little bit more white here in a little bit, I felt like it wasn't quite bright enough. Now I switched to my number 2 round and picking up some white just on the tip and just plopping it down to make random little dots in my black feather. Pick up a little bit of paint on the tip and just set your brush down, and it'll kind of make these random dots. If you want them to be a little bit more perfect sized, you could use the back end of your brush and they'd be perfect little dots. Perfect little circles, but I kind of wanted them to look a little bit random, so I'm pressing a little bit harder on some of them than others, make some of them a little bit larger and a little bit smaller. As I get down toward the bottom here, I'm barely pressing down so that they're very small and there's not a lot of paint coming off. I'm going to use that white again and do the other side of this feather, the blue and gray. Just go all the way up with the white. There you go. Give it a highlight on the one side. I'm picking up my teal and some white. And I'm going to go back over some of this green feather just to soften up that yellow section. Not covering it completely, but just kind of doing some lines over the top of it to make it look like it's kind of incorporated with the feather and not just sitting on top. Now I've grabbed some phthalo green, adding it to the teal color, and I'm going to do some stripes on the other side with that color. Here again, if your lines are getting too thick, you can always switch back over to your angle, either your angle or your liner brush. If you use the edge of your angle brush, you can get some fine lines with it as well. Just use whatever brush you're comfortable with. So I'm just going all the way up and down that feather with that phthalo green and teal mixture to give it a little bit darker color on that one side. Now I'm picking up the white and teal mix and doing some more stripes on the bright highlight side of this feather. And then some straight teal, adding that into some sections. You'll just have to decide when you're doing yours, kind of how detailed you want to get with it. Every now and then you might want to stop and look at it and see if there's any areas that are kind of bugging you. It's hard to tell at this stage because we're still adding more and more layers. But when you're kind of getting toward the end and I'm kind of almost done with a painting, I'll stop and I'll set it up in my living room. Here's white on the tip of my brush here, and I'm just doing some dots in those sections with the white, and now I'm going over the top of that light colored decoration with the white as well to give it a little bit brighter highlight. I'm picking up phthalo blue, and I'm doing dots with the phthalo blue white mixture that I had used before. Just doing a few of those dots in between the white stripes, and then using a little bit of that color in my feather. Like I was saying, once you get to where you're kind of liking this painting and you think it's close to being done, I usually set up my paintings in my living room and look at them for a few days, and then I can usually see if there's any changes that I want to make. And almost always there's something small that I will do. Here's the phthalo blue again, picking up a little bit of black to darken it up. I'm going to use that to draw my lines on this feather here. In hindsight, I probably would have put the dark side on the opposite end of this feather. I did the highlights on the opposite side on some of mine other ones, so if you want them all to kind of match, you can do that. It was far enough away that I didn't think it really mattered all that much, but now I'm picking up some gray green color, just mixed a little bit of the teal white mixture with my black, and I'm just doing that along the brighter side of the feather. It's hard to tell, the lights were shining on that side, so you can see it there a little bit better holding it up. Now I've got the phthalo blue, and I'm just doing some light feather lines with that. Let it dry completely, and then I'm doing a wash here of Quinacridone Magenta over the top, just at the bottom of that feather. Felt like it needed another color going on, so I added a little bit of this Quinacridone Magenta to kind of give it a little pop of red. Really, it's like a very bright red violet color. Use the edge of my brush with some quinacridone mixed with white. This is my angle brush, and I've just pushed it flat, and using the tip of it, it makes these really fine lines. They're great. So really any brush will work for your little lines there. Just whatever's you're more comfortable with. Now I'm going to use the flat edge of it and draw a nice thick line with the quinacridone mixed with a little bit of white. The white just makes it a little bit more opaque so that it'll cover over that dark green color underneath. Make sure that you're using the same angle that you did for your stripes earlier, and that way it will look more natural. The main thing you want to remember with the feathers is just to maintain parallel lines from the bottom all the way to the top. No matter what color you're changing it to, I'm still using the same angle and following those parallel lines all the way to the top of the feather, and that will help create the right look that we're going for. Using the same color at the very tip of the feather there, filling it in. Now I'm adding a little bit more white to the quinacridone magenta to make a soft pink color. I'm using the edge of my angle brush to draw some lines, following that same angle, keeping the lines parallel. At the top of the feather there, you're going to kind of create a spoke effect where all of the lines are going to converge down into that one point at the bottom of the V. Using the chiseled edge of my brush to draw my lines in the wet paint. There we go. Now I'm picking up the yellow ochre and a little bit of the quinacridone magenta, and that yellow ochre color had a little bit of the Hansa yellow in it as well. And I'm using the number 2 round to do some fine lines over the top of my yellow section at the tip of this painting, of that feather, I mean. Picked up a little Hansa yellow to soften the color on this side. Now I'm picking up a little bit of white, and I'm going to use it to do some highlights on the feather there, at the top. If you space them far enough apart, they won't get too solid on you. You can see your other colors through and underneath. And I'm doing on both sides, kind of concentrating along the edges there to make sure that that line is covered. I added a little bit more Hansa yellow white, and I'm just going over that line there to really make sure that you can't see the tracing through the paint, brightening up that edge a little bit. And then I'm using that same color over to outline the pink sections on this other feather. Using that same color in 2 places will kind of help unify your painting. I'm going to add the color as well on this green section. It's mostly Hansa yellow at this point. Just using the very tip of it, picking up a little bit of the teal now. And I always run my brush when I'm loading it, picking up some white here. When I'm loading the round brush, you want to twist the brush a little bit, just at the end there, before you go to the canvas. That will help maintain the point. Twist it, there we go. Just twisting it like that just before you go to the canvas will really help maintain a very fine edge on your brush. So now I'm going to add a little bit of that white color on the other side there. and in this feather on the end. Go over the top of the gray a little bit to soften it. Now I'm picking up the phthalo blue and a little bit of the phthalo green, and I'm mixing a very dark turquoise color. And I'm using the very tip to draw in some of the darker teal on this side of the feather. Go all the way up with it. And I'm using that darker teal color on this other feather too. Just starting from the center line and kind of working out, not all the way to the end. Now using this color again with a little bit of teal, just using the tip of my brush to kind of draw out some little fuzzy ends on my feather. And then go back over the end of the feather just a little bit to kind of make sure that those colors merge right there, just to blend it in. Now I'm using the phthalo blue on this feather, just drawing some very fine lines, some of them longer than others. Start from the center and work out. You always want to start from the center, because that'll be your fattest area, is where your brush starts. And then you pull to the outside. I'm adding a little teal highlights on the one side of that feather, and a few in this other blue feather as well. And really, this is not a design choice using this larger brush. It was just the brush that I happened to have. I added a little bit of phthalo blue, made it a light blue, and I'm going to use that color as well. A little bit brighter color. If your lines are not thin enough, you can just use your liner brush. But if you notice that I'm using holding the brush very close to the end, I can get a little bit more control that way. I hold it right at the end of the ferrule. Now I'm doing the centers of my feathers with burnt sienna and a little bit of black mixed in. Now if you're not comfortable with doing lines like this, you could use the edge of a flat brush. I find that's a little bit easier sometimes for beginners to control. As long as you push your brush to a nice flat chiseled edge, you can use it along its side and draw a nice long line without having to stop. You might practice this a little bit on paper. Make sure your feather is completely dry underneath, so that if you make a little mistake, you can just wipe it off. And I probably would have used a liner brush for this if I did it again, because my lines were a little bit thicker than I might have liked. It also can help to turn your brush or turn your canvas on its side. I didn't do that here on this one, but turn it on its side and work from left to right. Hold it at the same angle that you would use if you were writing a letter or writing with the pen, and you can get a little bit more control that way. Do all of the centers with this burnt sienna black mixture, just a tiny bit of black to darken it up. Then I added a little bit of white and just dry brushed a little bit of highlight on each one of these, right down the center. The darker one there, I kind of went a little bit thicker with it, just so that it'd show up over the black. We're almost done now. switch back to my number 2 round, and I've got white, the tiny bit of teal mixed in, but mostly white. I'm just making some circles with the wet paint, and I'm using the tip to draw through the wet paint to make some lines in it. It just gives it a little bit of texture and makes it look like that feather is running through. The feather lines are running through. So make sure that it matches up when you're pulling your lines, that it matches up with what's underneath. Just do circles all the way down on this one side only. Here's where you can really have fun and kind of use your imagination, do whatever kind of dots you want to, whatever kind of decoration you want to, stripes, dots, whatever, zigzags, whatever color combinations. There's all kinds of things you could do. I grabbed a little bit of black. I'm just touching up in the centers of each one of those little white dots with a tiny dot of black. I'm going to use the black again over on the other side to outline my white sections just on the outside of those. Trying not to go over the top of my burnt sienna center there, but if you do, you can go back in with a little bit of the burnt sienna and touch it up. Now I've got some white and a little bit of Hansa yellow. I'm going to make some V-shaped details in this feather up here, just at the top. And I'm just spacing them out equally. Adding a little bit more white to them to brighten them up. And then going back over the center line with a little bit of the burnt sienna where I covered it up. Picking up some white and phthalo green mixture and using it to do a circle around the outside of my white dots. Just do that for all of the circles on that one feather. And then I used a little bit of that color on my highlight side. If you notice, usually when I use a color for a detail, then I'll go ahead and use it somewhere else in my painting so that I make sure that in here I'm using it in this blue section of this feather. Just make sure that all of my feathers are unified. Really helps your overall composition to use the same color in several different places, even if it's just a little tiny bit of it. And that's it for today's project. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you try this, please share it with me on my Thankful Art page. The link is down in the description. Thanks so much for watching today. I really appreciate you. And please remember to subscribe, comment, share, give it a thumbs up. I'll see you next time. Thanks again.